Hi, everyone. My name is Donato Cabrera, and welcome to this week's Music Wise. We have such a special guest who I've gotten to know just a little bit over the last few months during this time of us being in our own little places, taking part on various sessions online. And it was through an incredible online series of days of talks at Minerva Institute, which Drue and I will talk about, I'm sure, for a little bit. But I would like to just start this week's Music Wise with an introductory video of our guest. Well, that alone gives us so much to chat and talk about. So please help me welcome Drue Kataoka. Hi, Drue.
Hi, how are you? It's great to see you.
It's great to see you as well. And happily ensconced in this little green room here at Vegas PBS. I'm in the middle of taping some youth concert that will be dispersed to the Clark County School District here in Las Vegas. And it's my first time conducting in 7 months, which was the strangest sensation, I have to say.
I saw that picture you posted on social media. That's fantastic. How did it go?
So far, so well. It's the strangest thing, waving your arms around, and you've given up to, and the trust that you must have in order for music to be sounded by the musicians who are really doing all of the work. It's such a magical feeling, and it sort of took me aback, that first upbeat that I gave, and for that to actually occur, it's just so magical.
Wow.
Drue, where are you coming from? I always love your background whenever I see you on various online talks.
Well, thank you for having me today, Donato. I'm in Silicon Valley in the Bay Area. At my studio, at my headquarters, and I have a lot of different art around me and different works in progress. So, yeah, I'm here at Drue Kataoka Studios.
So, Drue, I have so many questions for you with regard to what you do now, but I want to sort of go back into time, because it's not so often. I think most people, when they think of someone who is involved in the tech world, they may not think of that person being also in the artistic world. You know what I mean? It's sort of like it's Silicon Valley is seen as a certain thing, and the arts world is seen as something else. And what I love about what you do is you bring them together in such a unique and wonderful way. How did this evolve for you personally? where was this original inspiration? How did it come to be?
Well, when you talk about the arts and the sciences or technology and the humanities being divided or being perceived as divided, at times that's a real thing that happens in our contemporary world, but it's actually not how it's always been. You know, during the Renaissance and during other times of great human achievement, we had incredibly integrative, interdisciplinary, interwoven ways of thinking, building, and creating. And so I think we've more recently, over the past centuries, become more specialized and siloed. But I also think we're birthing into a new renaissance of more interconnectedness, and it's an opportunity and a time to build a more interstitial tissue between all the different disciplines. So everything comes full circle. But for me personally, my journey starts in Japan. I was born in Tokyo. I had a love of the arts very early on. As long as I can remember, I loved art, and the first art form that I started in was sumie, or Japanese ink painting. I'm biracial. My father is Japanese and my mother is American, and this particular art form, I studied it for many years and mastered it by the time I was in high school, and then went to Stanford, and I actually financed my education through the sale of my artworks, and was actually running a full business by the time that I was at Stanford. Actually, the choice of going to Stanford was unusual at the time. It was a bit going against the grain. I had a number of mentors and friends of the family who were saying, you should go to New York, you should go to Paris with the artistic trajectory you are on, you should go to some of these quote unquote artistic centers. And some of those were great musicians, Donato. Wynton Marsalis was and has been a great mentor and friend. He's like, girl, what are you going to do in Palo Alto? You need to come to New York, And I had the opportunity to play and meet for Jean-Pierre Rampal, and he was just kind of horrified at the idea of choosing Palo Alto over Paris. And I felt that I made this choice of Silicon Valley because I felt then, and I feel now, that it is really the Rome or Paris or New York or Florence or what have you of our time. And technology really does epitomize the creative spirit of our times. And also, the most important thing is going to be the convergence of all these fields, how they intersect with technology, and how those things emanate and ripple out from this place. And so I wanted to be here to witness that, to help influence it, shape it, be shaped by it. And although it was kind of a shocking thing to do at the time, looking back, it was definitely the right decision.
Drue, can you hear me? I'm using this.
You can't hear me?
For some reason I'm having a little bit of distortion. Anyway, I'm curious. So what was the connection with Britain, and how did that come to be?
Wait, Donato, are you able to hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Okay, fine.
So Wynton is someone that I had gone to hear perform very last minute when I was still in high school. Our economics teacher had said, I have tickets to this concert, and it's a sold out concert. If anybody in this class wants tickets to the concert, please take them. And so I took them, and I had a lot of familiarity with jazz. My father loved jazz music, but I had never seen Wynton perform. And that night he just gave an absolutely like pyrotechnical, virtuosic performance with jazz at Lincoln Center. And I went down to get a one of his books signed after the concert, and I said something to him about his embouchure or something, and he said, Are you a musician? You must be a musician to ask that question. And I said, well, yeah. And he said, well, why are you standing here? You need to go get your horn. So I was like, here I'm at a concert I didn't know I was going to be at that afternoon. And then he's telling me to go play for him. And so my parents drove me back really fast home, got my flute, came back. I started playing in the hallway. He still had a long line of people at that point. Still many people signing books. And we have footage of this encounter, and it's pretty funny to watch now. This is actually before cell phone video and all of that. But my mom had the frame of mind to grab a video camera and record it. And the whole time, I'm just playing different things. And he and some of the other musicians of jazz at Lincoln Center just kind of swearing and different jazz expletives and saying different things in very colorful language. And then he began to ask me to do different orchestral excerpts. He's like, can you play A Midsummer Night's Dream? Can you play this Daphnis and Chloe thing? And I actually was quite immersed in those at that time. And so I was playing things that he was asking for. And then he asked for the piano to be brought to the front of brought back out because they had broken down the stage. And so we went back from the back of the house to the front of the house. And then he played with me for a while. So we played. There was now a circle of people were following us. And that was the first night that I met him. And that ended up being a decades-long conversation, series of collaborations, mutual admiration, different projects that we've worked on, different artwork that I've created for him for his albums, for his Swinging into the 21st Century box set collections that he did. And furthermore, just lots of interesting conversations about art, music, jazz, Japanese culture, Zen. One of my favorite things that he says a lot, or he has said to me, is a rest is a rhythm. And I think that it's something that people can take into everyday life. Politicians could heed that. Talking heads could use that. It's just we focus so much on what we're saying, what we're making, what we're building, and think less about the spaces in between the things that we're building, the spaces in between the things that we're saying, the spaces in between the notes that are on the page, which is what gives things their elasticity, their lyrical quality, sometimes their meaning. Actually, blank space is really, really important in negotiation. Like a great negotiator will let a phrase land and not fall into it, and wait for the other side and have that kind of restraint. There's a really interesting article that came out recently about Tim Cook and another Silicon Valley tech leader, I can't recall who, but talking about the importance of the so-called awkward silence, how it's our inclination and want to just fill up space. But the power of leaving space, it takes a tremendous amount of discipline, and there's a great payoff for how you leave that space and how you shape that space in a variety of different contexts. And that is something that a training in music, a background in music and the arts, it's just one of 1,000 things that it can give to you.
I think one of the most fascinating aspects of music making is how close it is to the world of acting. In other words, you hear actors talk about so much about that. To be a great actor is to really master the art of listening. It's in the moments that you're not producing sound, whether it's great works of plays or great works of music. It's when those moments of silence happen in between the notes, as you so eloquently stated, where we learn perspective. And I think that I have to share with you that you asked me in one of our earlier email exchanges about certain heroes of mine. And I have to tell you that Wynton also was a great inspiration to me when, at about the same age as you, he came to where I grew up, which was Reno, Nevada, and he gave this mind-blowing concert. And the way Wynton weaves philosophy, politics to a certain extent, ethics. I think ethics plays a huge role in the music making of Wynton Marsalis and in jazz in general. That being a musician, being an artist, being in tech, there's a much larger connected world that musicians like him, artists like yourself, show us that way forward. And I'm curious that how, in that period of time when you then decided to go to Stanford, what was it? What were those moments of revelation while you were there? What were your focus? What was your academic focus? How did it sort of inspire your art making?
What were the areas of focus when I was at Stanford?
Mm-hmm. And the inspiration that how did what you do now? Because I want to take this next video about your Ambrosia series. Mm-hmm. How did that come to be? How did it sort of come into being?
Well, I think the inspiration were so many of the varied threads and courses that I was taking, and also the things that were happening in the Bay Area at that time. Mm-hmm. And again, that's why I chose to go to a place like Stanford, to have a broad-based liberal arts education, but to have this multidisciplinary environment where I could take multivariable calculus, and I could take some science, and I could take psychology, I could take the classics, but it would be very different from going to like a conservatory type route or an art school type route, which is be very heads down and almost with blinders on, with a singular focus in a very narrow way. And art is very comprehensive. It encompasses all of the different elements of our world. And I think actually that's one of the big problems with art schools today, is that they're not preparing our young people for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, virtual reality, augmented reality enveloped artificial intelligence world that we're now living in. They don't teach you how to code. They don't teach artists how to code. They don't really create bridges for artists to integrate their understanding with science, technology, and other fields. So what was my inspiration? My inspiration were all these things that were around me that I wanted to have, I wanted to be exposed to. Many different conversations with physicists. I got to know Douglas Osheroff and Martin Pearl. Both of them were Nobel Prize winning physicists at Stanford. So many great academics. Max Dresden, another physicist from the history of science, who was a friend of Einstein. And actually he played the piano and would play with Einstein at these different salons. And Max Dresden was very elderly at that time, and he's no longer alive, but he told these extraordinary stories. And so I will never meet Einstein, but to meet such a scientific luminary like Max and hear his interactions with people like like Einstein, and also how much music influenced someone like him. That was very interesting.
Do you feel that you bring up a point that I've thought so often about, because I started my education in state schools, and by and large it was a very good overall good education. And I have to tell you, the moment I started going to conservatory, I went as an older student, as a graduate student, and I felt sad frankly, I did feel sad for these undergraduates at this very well-known conservatory, because I knew they weren't learning anything about history, anything about philosophy, anything about science. The courses that were offered were introductory at best. And do you feel that this over specialization has set up? I think we already know the answer, but has poorly set up these people to these young musicians and young artists to sort of survive in today's world. And how do you think it can change?
Well, I think that there are so many different, very deep problems with the educational system at large, and particularly in the arts. And we just have to go back and look at the source and see how was this done well, and then try to reverse engineer it. Because right now it's a tremendous loss for our world. And if I look back at somebody like Leonardo da Vinci, he was someone who dissected countless cadavers and was truly committed. I mean, he would spend nights with decaying bodies so that he could spend the time that he needed to access these different bodies to do this work. And so these anatomical studies, they really informed his paintings and his drawings, and he understood every bone and every sinew, and so on and so forth. And so when he captured the human body, he captured it like no one had captured it before. However, the flip side of it is that his art also informed his anatomical studies. His art and his artistic practices and his artistic disciplines, they also informed the scientific parts of what he was doing. For example, he was very fascinated with the human brain and the human nervous system, and he wanted to map out the kind of inner cerebral ventricles and get kind of a three-dimensional picture of the brain. And so he was the first person in history to take a moldable substance and pour it into a human skull and get a casting of that shape, and then take that shape out so he could do these exploded drawings of the brain. But he came up with that idea because he had been pushing the envelope and pushing the frontiers with new ways of casting metal and creating these monumental sculptures at sizes. He was dreaming up sizes of sculptures that no one had dreamed up before. But I think that this cross-pollination between the two is really interesting. His scientific work advanced his art, but his artistic work advanced his science. And that's what we need to do. That's what we need to take the example of. And that's the kind of way we need to approach these things today, and try to have as ambitious of achievements as he had. One thing that really impressed me that I was just reflecting on the other day, Donato, was that he was very fascinated with fluid dynamics, and he was fascinated with the human heart. And so he wanted to understand how it works. So he created a sculpture of a human heart out of glass, filled it with water, put seeds in the water so that he could see how the liquid was flowing through. And at the end of the day, long story short, he came to some conclusions about how the human heart operates that would later take anatomists 450 years to figure out and come up with. So he figured this out like 450 years ahead of everyone else. And he didn't publish a lot of his work. He wasn't that excited about, the nitty-gritty of like publishing things. He was more interested in just discovering them. So it took, in many instances, for so many of his discoveries, it took hundreds of years for the rest of us, for the rest of the world, for other people to come up with those discoveries and then disseminate them and share them with the world. I think we need to go back to people like that, and many of those kind of great thinkers, and model that.
Absolutely agree. It reminds me, of course, also of the fairly recent discovery of how Vermeer most likely used camera obscura to create his sense of proportion and detail. Whereas, of course, his works of art are incredible, but it was always uncanny how he was able to create perspective. And now, of course, this marriage of art and science has really always been there. And it's over specialization has it's for better and for worse. And I think that for us going forward, as you have done so well with what you have created and what you talk about, is really a key essential for us as artists to be relevant and to really also lead into the future, showing the rest of humanity the connectiveness that art always has had, beyond art, beyond with the sciences, with all of the things we've discussed. Tell us a little bit about the Ambrosia series.
Yeah, so the Ambrosias are there's three categories of works that we are building right now at Drue Kataoka Studios. Right now, we're the leading art studio in Silicon Valley, and we are shipping artworks to collectors in over 30 countries and 5 continents. And we are really interested in the experiential kind of living organism nature of the artwork. And this is kind of an idea that I have been exploring for many years. And we're focused right now currently on 3 different categories of works. The first are the Ambrosias, as you mentioned. They're a signature type of work for us. They're colorful, they're complex, they're interacting with the light in powerful ways. They, every time you interact with the work, you see a different part of yourself and the environment that you're in mixed together in a new way. And they're also inspired by neural networks. I know that you have a video of it that you're going to show. The second type of works that we create are called celestial lace, and those are fabricated from the highest quality of stainless steel, but then brought to a mirror polish finish, which is a very technical treatment that's difficult to execute. And there's this vocabulary of highly faceted fragments and complex surfaces that we've developed. And then the third type of work that we are building here is technology artwork. So we really are very excited about the future of art with the medium of augmented reality and virtual reality, all the different possibilities there. And then over the years, different art science collaborations, like art that I created for the first zero gravity art exhibit in space at the International Space Station, and many different interesting partnerships and different types of works using technology as a medium and trying to bend it to an artistic purpose. So the video that you have of the Ambrosias, you'll see how a video captures them more than even a photograph, because they're so dynamic and they are changing all the time. And they are also the first fully modular artworks that we've created. So the different pieces inside can actually be moved by the collector and rotated and positioned differently. So there's a great deal of agency that someone has when they own that piece. And it, where you put one color or one painting with respect to another changes the mix of color and the look of the piece, which also is changing depending on the time of day, and it's also changing depending on where you place this, and they can actually be moved very smoothly with the wheels that we have underneath them. So when you have them in a space, they almost create like a portal-like effect into that room or facing out to that window.
Does the space play any role in the creation of the work prior, or is it never really into consideration?
What do you mean by that?
The space where the art will go in, do you have an idea of the space prior to creating the work?
That's a really good question. And so I always, my process, well, with my team, what we do is really, it's very consultative with the client or with the collector. It's almost like our studio is almost as like working with an architectural firm. Is more descriptive of how we work, because when a collector comes to us with an idea of something we want, we listen to them and understand where are they coming from, what are they trying to capture. Like it's almost like problem solving, but then hopefully exceeding expectations. And so yes, I take into account where, first of all, does this collector have in mind that this work may go? What's the history of that place? What's the meaning of that place? What's the significance of that particular moment for them? If there's a particular occasion, what that means, so for example, to give two concrete examples, we recently did a work for a collector where the ambrosia was a gift from him to his wife on the occasion of their anniversary, and parts of a poem that he had written, we actually deconstructed and put that within the piece. So there was this personal connection, and we have the ability to do that, to take all sorts of different imagery and text and meaning, and you'll see when you see the video how that can potentially be augmented and amplified. And then in other cases, we were doing works in steel. I might actually go and make sure that we get the space 3D scanned and go do a 3D capture, take multiple passes of a whole site, take that back to the studio and go live with that space when thinking about how am I going to create this sculpture, because it has to be in dialogue with the place, and I want to live with that place. So I can go and visit it 2 or 3 times, but I can actually take a good geometrical impression of what it is and live with it further, if you will, in virtual reality, walking around in it and kind of thinking about things from all angles, which is what is essential in sculpture.
Let's watch the video.
Ambrosias are a series of reflective sculptures that magically transform the viewer and the environment around them. I named them after ambrosia, which in ancient Greek mythology was the food of the gods and would confer immortality to whoever tasted it.
It's so diverse, and at the same time it's harmony. So it reflects to a large extent our world, which is, let's say, today multi-conceptual, multi-prolonged. And you have big pieces, small pieces, but at the end, what we strive for is harmony. No, art and culture, that's the language of the heart. And we need, when we communicate, not only to apply our brains and our rational thinking, but we need some feelings. And the feelings are stimulated by the art.
I'm curious a couple of things. They both are outdoor and indoor they have both. They've served in both purposes. They go well. How do you feel? Do they have a different meaning for you when they're outdoor and they have sort of a general, anyone can see them? For you, when you create that piece for an outdoor venue versus something that's perhaps for a private collector?
Well, I think you're speaking to this question of public versus private art.
Yes.
And I have created many works for many private collectors that are not public. Like I don't put them on my website. I can't really show them, and ultimately there's many people who will never see them because they're so private, and usually this type of client is very private about their space. And so I think that those works are very important, and those collectors are commissioning a lot of important work. At the same time, I'm very passionate about art having no boundaries and really being an incredible reservoir of creativity and positive energy for society. And so that's why I have been involved with, over the years, creating so many different artworks with a social dimension in them. So whether that's work that I did for Touch Our Future, which was an artwork, a digital tapestry, interactive artwork around decreasing infant mortality, or work for the 2016 presidential election around celebrating U.S. women's firsts, or different social justice artworks, or different pieces around, like, the portrait of Martin Luther King that I did for Stanford, or many different projects that I've done over the years, because I've felt that I want to make what I'm doing as accessible as possible when I have the ability to do so. And recently, one of the most recent intersections of art, technology, and social impact that I was involved with was a project called Online Protest, which was an idea that I had after the brutal and horrific killing of George Floyd this summer. So I had seen that there was a lost opportunity for people who really wanted to contribute their energy to protesting, to speaking up against police brutality, and could not go out on the streets because of COVID, because of maybe having prior health condition, or maybe taking care of an elderly parent, or maybe they just weren't close to one of the major urban centers where these protests were taking place. How to tap into that energy for good. And so I created an artwork which was called I Can't Breathe. It was the American flag, and rippling through that flag were the words I can't breathe, honoring the people who've been killed in these past years. And then we did this 7-day online protest. I had written to Bernice King, who's the youngest daughter of Martin Luther King, and I texted her and I said, what do you think about this idea of doing an online protest? And she said, I love it. It's the best idea I've yet heard. And so she and I collaborated along with the King Center, and we did a 7-day protest, which was very grass tops and grassroots, and brought together many different faith leaders, people in the NFL, people in Hollywood like Ben Stiller, Alyssa Milano, Steve Harvey, but I also brought Wynton Marsalis, Chelsea Clinton, Ellen DeGeneres joined us. It went on to the Tonight Show, so it actually became its own kind of mini movement, online protests. Then every night, Bernice King gave people actionable things they could do, like sign a petition to ban the chokehold, which went from 0 signatures to 40,000 signatures. So we made actual, real, tangible, concrete progress every night.
We lead perfectly into the next video, but the subject, of course, is that how all art can be used for social change and to be really, again, lead our culture into thinking in a more expanded way, showing us how to listen to one another, showing us how to feel with one another. And tell us a little bit about the video we're about to watch, about your connection with the Martin Luther King Center at Stanford.
Yeah, and I will say that I think that, you know, art is a really powerful social force, and we cannot underestimate it, and we really need to make sure we tap into it. You know, I look at Picasso's Dove of Peace, and I look at the work that he did of something like Guernica, and just see what that did for the global peace movement, perhaps more than XYZ meetings of XYZ diplomats in such and such a room. He really made such an impact. You know, that painting, Guernica, is really interesting because it commemorates the bombing of this small Basque village by German forces, and it was a brutal act of war. And he created this painting, but just to show you how powerful that work is. It was, I think, in 2003 that Colin Powell was making his statement to the UN about making the case for the war in Iraq, and the UN and the US government and the media decided to cover up this tapestry reproduction of Guernica that was hanging behind him when he gave his speech. They actually, in effect, censored Picasso's work and covered it up and put a blue banner. And I love this story because it just, if there's any doubt how powerful that work was, and also so many years later, the impact that it's still having to really make people wrestle with their consciousness, that story really proves it. I
just have to just say one quick thing about Guernica, that I've seen it. I've been in Madrid a few times to conduct, and every time I go, I make my pilgrimage to Guernica, and I can't think of something as powerful that is as abstract as that painting. Everything about that painting is abstract, yet it evokes this overwhelming emotion. It's palpable in the room, whether it's children on a little field trip, Spanish children from a field trip, or people visiting from all around the world. The same sense of just simply being overwhelmed by the emotion that's come. Yet everything in that painting is truly abstract. I can't think of something other than perhaps a symphony that is purely abstract, creating emotion that is similar.
Well, I agree, and it's really nice to hear you retell in a very vivid way your direct and visceral personal experience with that piece. I was looking back at this description of a survivor of the bombing, and I'll just share with you this account. And these were the accounts that Picasso was reading about in the newspaper that inspired him to create the work. The survivor said, "The air was alive with the cries of the wounded. I saw a man crawling down the street, dragging his broken legs. Pieces of people and animals were lying everywhere. In the wreckage, there was a young woman. I couldn't take my eyes off of her. Bones were jutting out and sticking up through her dress. Her head was twisted around to the right. She lay with her mouth open, her tongue hanging out. I threw up and I lost consciousness." So this is someone who was a witness and survived being killed, and those are the types of descriptions that Picasso was thinking about. And we still have this level of violence continuing on our world today. So, as artists, we are citizens, and so as citizens, we have a responsibility to use our voice, just like every other citizen, but we can also take the different tools in our artistic arsenal and use them for good, and we should do that. And back to your point about public art, I think public art is a tremendous opportunity to do that. I think oftentimes it does get a bad rap, but it doesn't have to be that way. And I think the next generation of public art will be online art and digital art that's done in a really compelling and complex way. And we're going to start to see more and more of that type of art that leverages new technology and does not require that you as the viewer or the person experiencing the art has to be in one of the major colonial centers of the world to experience it, that you have to be in Rome or Paris or London or New York, that the art is concentrated in those few places, which are also the places that have pillaged the most art from other places around the world. That is a way of the past. And I think one of the benefits of the new technology, integrating new technologies with cultural practices going forward, will be democratizing this art and culture.
Great. Let's watch this video.
Precious Lord was Dr. King's favorite hymn. It is a deeply moving piece of music. In fact, Precious Lord is one of the last things King mentioned before he was assassinated. There's a deep kind of soulfulness that you feel when you're here. There's the traces of all these people going all the way back to the 19th century that have walked across these marble floors, and you can feel that energy in the room. What I feel is critical is to make sure that the ideas, the wisdom of Dr. King, that gets imparted into the fundamental structures of these technologies at the ground floor, that we interweave his ideas and that we permeate his ideas into artificial intelligence algorithms, into virtual reality, whole worlds that are getting built and whole worlds that are going to shape society, shape bias, shape our young people, shape how we see ourselves and how we see the future. We need to go back to some of these incredible ideas that he distilled so skillfully and make sure that we carry them over on this bridge to the future, and that Dr. King's legacy is really carried into the future.
We originally met as guests. We were, I can't remember exactly what our luminaries. I think we were.
They gave us big fancy titles.
They gave us a big fancy title, but of course, and I think you feel the same way, that the fancy titles should have been given to those amazing students of Minerva University, which is an online university that was created by our friend Ben Nelson. And at first I wasn't quite sure why I was invited, but then it became really you helped in answering my question as to why I was invited with what you were sharing with these incredibly gifted and curious students who will go out into the world and certainly change it. And one of the things that struck me was that while the whole concept of Minerva is phenomenal, and I've always felt it to be the case, but of course now more than ever it really is appropriate and inspiring what Ben has created, in that it's really it is online in that they meet virtually, but they're in the world making change. But I feel that what you had to say to them was particularly poignant. It has a lot to do with what we've already talked about, in that art and the way people express themselves, whether it's creating new economies in third world countries, or creating business relationships between disparate sources, that this idea that art can really be a central point. And I think that for them, I think it was more foreign at first that we were there than I felt at first being there myself. So I just curious about your feelings about Minerva, about how we met, and about how the idea of what is happening with something like Minerva is helping to change, sort of going back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation.
Yeah, so you're talking about Minerva, this university that has a very avant-garde format where the students learn primarily online, but then also it's a hybrid offline, but they travel all around the world from Latin America to Europe and Asia. So they really end up traveling the whole world versus being centered in one campus as you would traditionally have. And then they have these magnificent graduation ceremonies where it's not just a traditional ceremony where people give speeches and people kind of get bored. They're actually very lively intellectual debates and roundtables where they bring people in to push and pull different ideas and meet the students, and the students push us and we push the students. And I think that's what you're talking about, the context in which you and I were some of the people that were brought for this graduation ceremony unlike no other, which is a great idea. And I think more universities should take a page out of that. And to your point, they're also much more positioned for this post-pandemic world because so much of their curriculum is online, and they have built all these ways of connecting students in a purely digital format, not having to be tethered to the real world. I thought it was great. The people that they had curated to bring in, all such from varied backgrounds, anchored in real world experiences, whether it was people in nonprofit or business leaders or entrepreneurs or people in art and culture like you and myself. I think that was a great idea. And I received so many notes and little Instagram texts or LinkedIn messages from the students afterwards that had said that they really enjoyed some of those conversations that we were at, or they had a question or had made them think. So I think it's a great format. I think one of the things that I was talking about, and now it's been a while since we had that conversation, but one of the things that came up was that I was pointing out to them that we have lost the ability to slowly consume information. We've been so behaviorally modified by the way that we interact with technology, and it's fragmented our thinking, and everything has been unbundled into smaller and smaller pieces. So it's really one of many really powerful and positive things about deeply engaging with art and music is to go back to slowly consuming and also benefiting from the effects that would have on one's brain. So what I mean by that is, for example, listening to classical music is actually a great way to practice mindfulness. I mean, they actually have to be able to stay focused and stay immersed in a whole symphony. Like, how many people today, Donato, really will just sit down and listen to one full symphony, let alone one Wagner opera? We really only have the attention span right now to listen to a 3-minute pop song and a 2-minute pop song and a 5-minute pop song. And that really kind of atrophies our brain because we've lost the ability to do this kind of active listening where you're thinking about this motif that came in this movement, and then an hour and a half later, your brain is connecting it to something that you heard before, and there's multiple layers. There's all these different harmonies and polyphonies and just different themes and things that are being interwoven. And it's so cognitively stimulating for your brain, but just training yourself to stay immersed in something like that for a period of hours is something that most people don't do and have completely lost touch with how to be able to do it at all. Same thing for the visual arts. When people go to a museum, they look at things in actually a very frenetic way. And there was a scientific study that was done where they let people go through kind of the museum at their own pace, like taking lots of pictures of everything that they saw, which is something that people do when they go to museums. Oh, I want to put that on Instagram. I want to take a picture of that, take a picture of that. Then they had a control group that were not allowed to take any pictures, but were only allowed to just look at the works. And then when they compared those two groups side by side, the people who took all the photographs remembered far less than the people who actually just looked at the work directly, unmediated through the technology.
Right.
And so when you look at some of these great masterpieces, sculptures, paintings, they were originally supposed to be pieces that you would sit down and experience over a period of hours, over a period of weeks, not in a split second. And so if we're only experiencing them in such a short way, then we're not actually getting the full benefit and breadth and depth of those works.
We were talking about our heroes and what you have already mentioned one of yours, well, a few of yours already, but in terms of your main instrument, Jean-Pierre Rampal was someone who remains an inspiration to you to this day, and as he does to me. I mean, he was one of the first artists that I was aware of as a young person. You know, he had so many recordings that were, the Claude Bowling, and which are phenomenal. And you know, he was really, until Emmanuel Paoud, the principal flutist of the Berlin Phil, there really hadn't been someone who played the flute. Of course, James Galway was the other person in that world. But tell us your connection with Jean-Pierre Rampal and what we're going to share.
Well, I first saw Jean-Pierre Rampal on Sesame Street, and it had made a huge impression on me. And I really hope that we continue to bring that caliber of artist and musician to morning children's television, because today one of the things that saddens me is so much of children's television is just about marketing and getting kids addicted to big brands and to buying stuff and getting in the habit of wanting to take their parents to go buy them stuff. But bringing artists like that to something like Sesame Street really has a huge impact on young people. It did on me. And actually, you can on YouTube, you can look up some of his Sesame Street performances. Some of them are on there, and they're pretty amazing. But that's where I first saw him. Then I got a chance to see him in concert when I was very young, and we were like way up in the balcony, had my binoculars looking down, and I saw him playing. I was captivated and looked at my mom and said, one day I would love to meet Mr. Rampal, and I would love to have a gold flute like he does as well. And I studied the flute for many years. I had great teachers, including Keith Underwood, who I studied with many, many years. I don't know if you've ever intersected with him, but he has taught a lot of principal flutists all over the world, and also just other musicians in other disciplines, because his techniques are so interesting. They actually apply to other instruments. Okay. And I I loved Rampal's recordings. I ended up owning all of his recordings. I think he was the greatest. He's the greatest flutist that has ever lived. He pushed the instrument. He innovated with the instrument. He took violin concertos that had never been performed on the flute, and he took them to a whole another level on the flute in a way which people didn't think could be done. And one thing that's interesting about him is, if you notice, like when he's playing, he's always so calm. He has almost like a sleepy look on his face.
He does. I have noticed that.
He has a sleepy look, and if you look at a lot of other woodwind players, and I think this is just like it just, for me, it shows like how far, you know, the gap is, or like what separates kind of a flute god or woodwind god like this from mortal but brilliant players, is that like a lot of people look very tense. It's like a lot of eyebrows moving around and a lot of just like tension in the face, and he is just so dead centered and calm, and he almost looks like sublime, like he's in a state of bliss, because that's where he is, and he's actually channeling that when he plays. I had written to him when I was in high school. I wanted to meet him and was close to meeting him a couple times, but he would come to the U.S. and his tours would get canceled. Long story short, I eventually did get to go meet and play for him, and it was actually with the help of Winton, who helped make that introduction for me. And I went up to go see Ron Paul in San Francisco. My mom and I went to meet him at the St. Francis Hotel. He was at the top of the hotel, and I opened the door, and he had like all these flowers, like an opera diva in his room. And it was like so French and everything. And I had my gold flute at that time, and I opened it, and he had a case that had 3 gold flutes in it. And I played some of the Cacciatorian Concerto, which that's one of my favorite recordings of his. I love his recording of that. It's superhuman, and it's extraordinary. He also played my flute, and I say that he gave it a molecular massage because I could feel the vibration coming off of it when he gave it back to me. And I think I just would love for people to go listen to his recordings, find videos of him on YouTube. Because a lot of people don't know who he is.
We'll post some in the comments. Yeah, you're right. It's a travesty that he's sort of fallen. His name has fallen off the current bandwagon of whatever the classical music world is today. I think what we should do, because I actually have to run and do a rehearsal of all things, fancy that. We'll end with Ron Paul's video. And I promised that I was going to share one of my current heroes as well, who just happens to be John Prine. I'm totally obsessed with John Prine right now. But Drue, I want to thank you so much for taking part in this and sharing what you have been so inspiring to me, really, these last few months. I'm so thankful that we happen to be on Minerva at the same time. And
serendipitously brought together.
Indeed. And I look forward to the time when we can actually meet in person.
Yes, I would like to go to one of your concerts. And I want to tell everyone, if they want to connect with anything that I'm doing, my handle, which is on the screen, at Drue Kataoka, is on Instagram. It's on Twitter. And Drue Kataoka Art is on Facebook. And Drue Kataoka Studios is the handle for the studios on Instagram. And my website is drue.net, and I have a newsletter there that people subscribe to. It talks about creativity. So I'm happy to connect with anyone on those platforms. And then I think the video that you're showing is going to be a performance of Precious Lord, which was Dr. Martin Luther King's favorite hymn. That was the one that he loved the most, and he actually had mentioned it the night that the day that he was assassinated. He was talking about that, and sadly and tragically he was killed. But he would talk about this piece often, and I played it on the occasion of the 90th birthday celebration of his at Stanford.
Thank you so much, Drue.
Thank you for everything that you do, Donato. Thank you for your cultural leadership and for who you are in this world, and all of the great cultural initiatives that you're working on.
So appreciate it. Take care.
To dedicate that piece that I played to Clay and Susan Carson for their tireless multi-decade service to